There's a special kind of terror that only American homeowners understand. It's not the fear of burglars or natural disasters. It's the sight of a perfectly folded letter sitting in your mailbox, stamped with the logo of your homeowners association. That innocent piece of paper has the power to ruin your entire week over something as trivial as the height of your grass or the shade of your curtains. HOAs were created to protect property values, but somewhere along the way, they became the neighborhood police, the color committee, and the fun police, all rolled into one. Today, we're diving into 29 real complaints that prove some HOAs have completely lost touch with reality. These aren't made up. These actually happen to real people in real neighborhoods across America. Rule number 1. Let's kick things off with a story from sunny California. A homeowner decided to do the environmentally responsible thing and install solar panels on his roof. He spent thousands of dollars, got all the proper city permits, and was excited to reduce his carbon footprint and electricity bills. 2 weeks after installation, a crisp HOA violation letter arrived. The complaint stated that his solar panels were creating an unsightly glare that was disturbing the peaceful aesthetic of the neighborhood. The irony here is almost too perfect. The man was literally trying to save the planet, and the HOA treated him like he had installed a giant disco ball on his roof. They demanded he remove the panels or face daily fines. What they didn't realize is that California state law actually protects homeowners' rights to install solar panels. He sent them a copy of the law, and suddenly the HOA went completely silent. Sometimes the best response to petty tyranny is knowing your rights. Rule number 2. In a quiet suburb of Texas, a retired military veteran decided to honor his fallen comrades by placing a small memorial garden in his backyard. It featured a few American flags, some flowers, and a modest stone with the names of friends he had lost in service. It was deeply personal and barely visible from the street. The HOA, however, saw things differently. They sent him a violation notice claiming that his memorial constituted an unapproved outdoor display and that the flags exceeded the maximum allowable height for decorative elements. Let that sink in for a moment. A man who served his country was being told that his private tribute to fallen soldiers was a neighborhood eyesore. The story eventually made local news, and the HOA quietly dropped the complaint after facing massive public backlash. But the damage was done. The message was clear. In some neighborhoods, honoring heroes is less important than maintaining the beige monotony. Rule number 3. A family in Florida learned the hard way that even your children's birthday party can become an HOA nightmare. They hosted a small outdoor party for their 7-year-old daughter, complete with balloons, streamers, and a bounce house rented for the afternoon. The party lasted about 4 hours on a Saturday. By Monday morning, a violation notice was waiting in their mailbox. The HOA cited them for 3 separate offenses. First, the balloons were in unapproved colors. Second, the bounce house was classified as a temporary structure requiring prior written approval. Third, and this is the best part, the sound of children laughing and playing was deemed excessive noise during designated quiet hours. Apparently, the designated quiet hours in this neighborhood covered most of the day, including Saturday afternoons. The family was essentially fined for the crime of letting their daughter have a happy birthday. Rule number 4. You would think that putting up a basketball hoop in your own driveway would be a straightforward, all-American activity. Not in one Pennsylvania neighborhood. A father installed a portable basketball hoop so his teenage son could practice at home instead of hanging out on the streets. Within a week, the complaints started rolling in. The first complaint was about noise. Fair enough, basketballs do make sound. But the second complaint was something else entirely. A neighbor claimed that the basketball hoop was creating a traffic hazard because cars driving by might be distracted by the sight of teenagers playing sports. The HOA sided with the complainant and demanded the hoop be removed. The father fought back, pointing out that the hoop was on his private property and posed no actual traffic risk. The HOA's response was to fine him $50 for every day the hoop remained visible. He eventually moved the hoop to his backyard, where his son could practice in peace, hidden from the prying eyes of neighbors who apparently had nothing better to do. Rule number 5. In Arizona, a woman made the mistake of being too enthusiastic about Halloween. She decorated her front yard with a spooky graveyard scene, complete with fake tombstones, cobwebs, and a few plastic skeletons. It was festive, temporary, and beloved by the neighborhood kids who would stop by to admire it. The HOA was not amused. She received a violation notice citing her decorations as morbid, inappropriate, and potentially traumatizing to young children. The irony was thick enough to cut with a knife. The neighborhood children loved the decorations. It was apparently the adults on the HOA board who were traumatized by the sight of plastic bones. She was ordered to remove everything immediately or face escalating fines. She complied but made sure to send the HOA board a formal invitation to her house on Halloween night. None of them showed up. Apparently, they were too scared of the fake skeletons. Rule number 6. A dog owner in Georgia discovered that even man's best friend isn't safe from HOA overreach. She had a small, well-behaved golden retriever who loved to sit by the front window and watch the world go by. It was adorable and completely harmless. Then came the complaint. A neighbor claimed that the dog staring out the window was intimidating and made them uncomfortable walking past the house. The HOA actually took this complaint seriously and sent the homeowner a formal warning. She was advised to keep her dog away from front-facing windows during daylight hours to avoid making neighbors feel watched. Let me repeat that. A golden retriever, one of the friendliest breeds on the planet, was accused of intimidation for the crime of looking outside. The homeowner responded by putting up a sign in the window that read, "Beware of dog, he might look at you." The HOA was not amused, but they couldn't do anything about it since the sign was on the interior of the house. Rule number 7, gardening is supposed to be a relaxing hobby, but for one Colorado family, it became a legal battle. They decided to plant a small vegetable garden in their backyard to grow tomatoes, peppers, and herbs. Nothing fancy, just a few raised beds tucked away behind their house. The HOA somehow found out and sent them a violation notice. The complaint stated that vegetable gardens were not permitted because they attracted pests and created unpleasant odors. The family pointed out that their garden was organic, well-maintained, and produced no more odor than any flower bed. The HOA doubled down, claiming that the site of vegetables growing was not in harmony with the community's landscaping standards. Apparently, tomatoes are offensive, but perfectly manicured lawns that require gallons of chemical pesticides are totally fine. The family eventually won their case by citing state laws that protect the right to grow food on private property. But the fact that they had to fight for the right to grow tomatoes in their own backyard tells you everything you need to know about HOA priorities. Rule number 8. A nurse working night shifts in Ohio became the target of one of the pettiest complaints imaginable. Because she worked nights, she often came home in the early morning hours and would park her car in her driveway around 6 or 7 a.m. Her neighbor, an HOA board member, filed a complaint claiming that the sound of her car door closing in the morning was disturbing their sleep. Keep in mind, this wasn't a loud engine or a blaring horn. It was literally the sound of a car door closing once at a normal volume. The HOA sent her a formal warning about noise violations and suggested she park on the street to minimize disturbance. She pointed out that parking on the street would violate another HOA rule about overnight street parking. The HOA had no response to this logical contradiction. She continued parking in her driveway, and the complaints continued. Eventually, she installed a security camera that caught the same board member slamming his own car door at 5 a.m. every morning on his way to work. The hypocrisy was finally exposed, and the complaints mysteriously stopped. Rule number 9 in Nevada. A couple learned that even patriotism has limits in HOA territory. After their son was deployed overseas with the military, they hung a small Blue Star banner in their front window. The Blue Star banner is a tradition dating back to World War I, representing a family member serving in the armed forces. It's a symbol of sacrifice and pride. The HOA sent them a violation notice, stating that window displays were not permitted and that the banner was disrupting the uniform appearance of the street. The couple was devastated. They weren't making a political statement. They were simply honoring their son who was risking his life for his country. When the story hit local media, veterans groups rallied behind the family. The HOA eventually backed down, but only after facing intense public pressure. They never apologized. They simply stopped enforcing the rule in this particular case, proving that sometimes shame is the only language these boards understand. Rule number 10. A homeowner in Michigan made the unforgivable mistake of owning a pickup truck. He used it for his landscaping business and parked it in his own driveway every night. The truck was clean, well-maintained, and not particularly large. It was just a standard work truck. The HOA cited him for having a commercial vehicle on residential property. He argued that it was his personal vehicle that he also used for work, which should be allowed. The HOA disagreed, claiming that any vehicle with a company logo was classified as commercial and therefore prohibited. He offered to remove the small magnetic logo from the door. The HOA said that wasn't enough because the truck still looked commercial due to its ladder rack. He removed the ladder rack, then they complained that the truck bed looked too utilitarian. At this point, the man realized he could never win. The HOA didn't have a problem with commercial vehicles. They had a problem with working class people living in their neighborhood. He eventually sold the truck and bought a sedan, which was apparently more acceptable for a man who carries ladders and tools for a living. Rule number 11. A grandmother in South Carolina became an unlikely rebel when she planted flowers in the wrong color. She had spent years cultivating a beautiful rose garden in her front yard, and one spring she decided to add some bright purple and pink flowers to the mix. She thought they would add a cheerful pop of color. The HOA thought otherwise. A violation notice arrived stating that her flower colors were not on the approved list of earth tones. She was instructed to remove the purple and pink flowers and replace them with something more subdued, like beige, brown, or muted green. Beige flowers. Let that sink in. She was 82 years old and had been gardening for longer than most of the board members had been alive. She told the HOA that they could fine her all they wanted, but she wasn't removing flowers that made her happy. They sent her fines. She ignored them. Eventually, the story made local news, and the HOA quietly dropped the issue. Sometimes stubbornness and a good news story are all you need to defeat petty bureaucracy. Rule number 12. In a suburb of Washington State, a tech worker faced the wrath of the HOA for an invisible offense. He had set up a small home office in his spare bedroom and worked remotely for a software company. He never had clients visit. He never had deliveries related to work. He simply sat at his computer and typed code. Somehow, the HOA found out he was working from home and sent him a violation notice for operating a business in a residential zone. He explained that he wasn't operating a business. He was an employee working remotely, which is completely different. The Ho argued that any work conducted from home constituted commercial activity. By their logic, anyone answering a work email from their living room was running an illegal enterprise. The case was eventually dropped, but only after the homeowner threatened legal action. This was in 2019, before the pandemic made remote work universal. One can only imagine the chaos this Ho faced in 2020, when suddenly everyone was working from home. Rule number 13, a musician in Tennessee discovered that his hobby was considered a weapon of mass disturbance. He played acoustic guitar in his living room with the windows closed, usually for about 30 minutes in the early evening. Nothing loud, nothing electric. Just a man and his guitar playing folk songs. A neighbor filed a noise complaint, claiming the music was intrusive and unwanted. The Ho issued a warning, advising him to limit his playing to designated hours that apparently didn't exist in the rulebook. He asked for clarification. When could he play? The response was vague. He could play when it wouldn't disturb anyone. Since his neighbor was apparently disturbed by any sound at any time, this effectively meant never. He invested in soundproofing for his room and continued playing. The neighbor then complained that they could hear a faint humming sound through the walls. At that point, the man realized his neighbor didn't have a problem with guitar music. His neighbor had a problem with him existing. He put his house on the market and moved to a neighborhood without an HOA, where he now plays guitar on his front porch whenever he wants. Rule number 14, a family in Illinois had a nightmare experience involving their Christmas lights. They put up a modest display in early December, just some white lights along the roofline and a lit wreath on the door. Nothing extravagant. The Ho rule stated that holiday decorations could be displayed from December 1st through January 15th. They followed the rules perfectly. On January 16th, they received a violation notice for failing to remove their decorations on time. The catch was that January 16th fell on a Monday, and the family had planned to take down the lights over the weekend, but got busy with work and school. They were literally one day late. The fine was $200. They appealed, explaining the circumstances. The appeal was denied. Rules are rules, they were told. They paid the fine and made sure to mark their calendars for the following year, but the experience left them bitter. They went from being enthusiastic Christmas decorators to people who now put up the bare minimum, if anything at all. The Ho didn't just fine them. They killed their holiday spirit. Rule number 15, a widow in Florida faced an Ho complaint that can only be described as heartless. After her husband passed away, she placed a small memorial plaque on a tree in her front yard. It was about the size of a postcard and simply had his name, birth date, death date, and the words beloved husband. It was her way of keeping his memory close. The Ho cited her for an unapproved attachment to landscaping elements. They demanded she remove the plaque immediately or face fines. She was grieving. She was alone. And now she was being harassed by a board of strangers over a tiny piece of metal on a tree. Neighbors who heard about the situation were outraged. Many of them had known her husband and thought the plaque was a touching tribute. A petition was started, and over 100 residents signed it demanding the Ho back off. Faced with overwhelming community opposition, the board relented. The plaque stayed. But the widow never forgot how the Ho treated her during the worst moment of her life. Rule number 16 in Oregon. A family got in trouble for the content of their mailbox. Not the outside of the mailbox. The inside. A mail carrier apparently complained to the HOA that the family's mailbox was cluttered with old mail and made deliveries difficult. The Ho then sent the family a violation notice for maintaining an unsanitary mail receptacle. The family was baffled. First, how was the mail carrier's convenience an Ho issue? Second, since when was the inside of a mailbox subject to neighborhood regulations? They cleaned out the mailbox to avoid further conflict, but the precedent was terrifying. If the Ho could regulate the inside of your mailbox, what was next? Inspections of your refrigerator? Audits of your sock drawer? The family started attending Ho meetings to ensure no more ridiculous rules were passed. They became accidental activists, all because someone thought old mail was a community problem. Rule number 17, a homeowner in New Jersey learned that even the way you mow your lawn can be wrong. He had always mowed his lawn in diagonal stripes, a technique that's actually recommended by lawn care experts for healthier grass. He thought it looked nice, and more importantly, it was his property and his choice. The HOA disagreed. A complaint was filed, stating that his diagonal mowing pattern was inconsistent with the neighborhood's aesthetic standards. He was instructed to mow in straight lines parallel to the street, like everyone else. He asked if this was actually in the rulebook. It was apparently an unwritten understanding. He kept mowing diagonally. The fines started coming. He fought back, demanding they show him the specific rule he was violating. They couldn't. Eventually, the Ho backed down. But not before wasting everyone's time over the direction of lawnmower stripes. Rule number 18. A young couple in Virginia made the mistake of having a creative doormat. They purchased a doormat with a humorous quote that read, "Not today, Satan." It was a popular phrase, a playful reference, and clearly meant as a joke. A neighbor saw it and filed a complaint claiming the doormat was offensive and promoted religious intolerance. The HOA sent a violation notice for displaying inappropriate messaging at a community entry point. The couple argued that their front door was not a community entry point. It was the entrance to their private home. They also pointed out that the phrase was a joke and had nothing to do with actual religious beliefs. The HOA was unmoved. They were given a choice: remove the doormat or face fines. They removed it and replaced it with a plain one. But they also started looking for a new home in a neighborhood where they could express their sense of humor without facing financial penalties. Rule number 19: an elderly man in Arizona got in trouble for feeding the birds. He had a small bird feeder in his backyard where he would put out seeds every morning. It was his daily ritual, a simple pleasure that brought him joy in his retirement years. A neighbor complained that the bird feeder was attracting too many birds, which were making noise and leaving droppings on their property. The HOA sided with the neighbor and demanded the feeder be removed. The man tried to compromise. He offered to move the feeder to the far corner of his yard, away from the neighbor's property. The HOA said no. Any bird feeder was now considered a nuisance. He removed the feeder but continued to scatter seeds on the ground for the birds. The neighbor complained again. The HOA told him he couldn't feed birds at all, not even by putting seeds on his own soil. He was essentially being told that his private property was not actually private. The birds still came anyway, because birds don't read HOA bylaws. Rule number 20. A father in Texas faced the HOA's wrath for teaching his son how to work on cars. He was showing his teenage son basic automotive maintenance, things like changing oil and replacing brake pads. They worked on a car in their driveway on weekends, never making excessive noise and always cleaning up after themselves. The HOA cited them for conducting automotive repairs in a residential area, which was classified as commercial activity. The father explained that he wasn't running a repair shop. He was teaching his son life skills. The HOA didn't care. They said any work on vehicles beyond washing was prohibited. The father asked if he was supposed to take his car to a shop for every minor repair. The HOA said yes. He asked if he could at least check his oil in his driveway. They said they would need to review that request. At that point, he realized the HOA existed not to maintain property values, but to prevent people from actually living in their homes. He sold the house and moved to a rural area where he and his son could work on cars in peace. Rule number 21. A woman in North Carolina got fined for her curtains, not because they were ugly, not because they were falling apart, but because they were the wrong color. Her living room curtains were a deep burgundy, which she thought was a rich, elegant color. They were only visible from outside when the lights were on inside at night. A neighbor apparently spent their evening staring at her windows and decided that the burgundy was not in harmony with the community's exterior color palette. The HOA agreed and sent her a violation notice. She was instructed to replace her curtains with white, cream, or beige options to maintain visual consistency from the street. She argued that curtains were interior decorating, not exterior elements. The HOA argued that if something was visible from outside, it was subject to exterior rules. By that logic, they could regulate what color pajamas she wore if she walked past an open window. She changed the curtains but bought blinds to put behind them, which she keeps closed at all times. The HOA now has no idea what color curtains she has, which was apparently the point all along. Rule number 22. A homeowner in Connecticut discovered that even your garbage can placement is a high-stakes game. He had his garbage cans stored neatly on the side of his house, behind a small fence that mostly obscured them from view. Mostly, but not entirely. A sliver of the cans was visible if you stood at a very specific angle on the sidewalk. A neighbor, who apparently had nothing better to do, found that angle and filed a complaint. The HOA cited him for visible storage of waste containers. He was ordered to build a taller fence or move the cans somewhere completely invisible. He built the taller fence. Then they complained the fence was too tall. He lowered the fence. Then the cans were visible again. It became a never-ending cycle of fence adjustments that cost him hundreds of dollars and countless hours. Eventually, he built a small enclosure specifically for the garbage cans, painted it to match his house, and submitted the plans to the HOA for approval. They approved it, but not before making him wait 3 months and pay a review fee. Rule number 23. A family in Utah made the mistake of having an unfashionable car. Their vehicle was about 15 years old but ran perfectly fine. It was clean, well-maintained, and always parked in their garage or driveway. The HOA sent them a violation notice claiming their car was an eyesore that was bringing down property values. The complaint specifically mentioned the car's faded paint and old-fashioned design. The family was shocked. Their car was functional, legal, and parked on their own property. How was this an HOA issue? They asked for the specific rule they were violating. The HOA pointed to a vague clause about maintaining community standards. They asked what those standards were. The answer was essentially that their car looked too old and poor for the neighborhood. The classism was barely hidden. They couldn't afford a new car, and they weren't about to go into debt to please their neighbors. They kept the car, paid the occasional fines, and started saving to move somewhere less judgmental. Rule number 24. A homeowner in Indiana learned that even the plants you choose can be wrong. He planted several native wildflowers in his front yard as part of an effort to support local pollinators. The plants were healthy, colorful, and attracted butterflies and bees. The Ho cited him for having an unkempt yard. He argued that his yard wasn't unkempt. It was a deliberate native plant garden designed to support wildlife. The Ho didn't see the difference between intentional wildflowers and neglected weeds. They demanded he remove all the native plants and replace them with traditional grass and approved shrubs. He tried to educate them about the environmental benefits of native plants. They didn't care. Rules were rules, and the rules said lawns must be conventional. He eventually created a compromise by planting the wildflowers in the backyard where the Ho couldn't see them and putting boring, approved plants in the front. The butterflies still came, they just had to fly around back. Rule number 25. A college student living with his parents in Maryland got the family in trouble for his parking habits. He would sometimes park his car in the street overnight because the driveway was full with his parents' vehicles. The Ho had a rule against overnight street parking, which the family was aware of, but they assumed occasional violations during busy times would be tolerated. They assumed wrong. The Ho had an enforcement officer who drove around at exactly 2 a.m. taking photos of any cars parked on the street. The family received violation notices with timestamp photos proving their son's car was on the street at 2 in the morning. The fines added up quickly. The family tried to fight back, arguing that the rule was excessive and the enforcement was predatory. The HOA said the rule existed for safety and aesthetic reasons. What safety concern exists at 2 a.m. on a quiet suburban street, they asked. The HOA had no answer. They just kept sending fines. The students started parking 3 blocks away in a neighborhood without an HOA and walking home. Rule number 26. A woman in Georgia got in trouble for the size of her wreath. She hung a decorative wreath on her front door, as millions of Americans do. Her wreath was about 24 inches in diameter, a perfectly normal size you'd find in any home goods store. The Ho sent her a violation notice stating that door decorations could not exceed 18 inches in diameter. She measured her wreath. It was indeed larger than allowed, but by only 6 inches. She asked why the rule existed. Nobody on the board could explain. It had simply always been the rule. She replaced her wreath with a smaller one that met the specifications, but she never understood why 6 inches of decorative material made any difference to anyone. The old wreath now hangs inside her house, where the HOA can't measure it. Rule number 27. A young family in Missouri faced fines for their children's toys. Their kids had a few outdoor toys, including a plastic playhouse, a sandbox, and some ride-on vehicles. All of it was kept in the backyard, but portions were visible above the fence line. The HOA cited them for visible children's recreational equipment that was not consistent with the neighborhood's mature landscaping aesthetic. The family asked what they were supposed to do. Make their children play inside all the time. The HOA suggested storing the toys in the garage when not in use. The family pointed out that they didn't have room in the garage for everything. The HOA suggested getting rid of some toys. The family suggested the HOA mind their own business. Fines were exchanged. Legal threats were made. Eventually, the family built a higher fence to block the view. The HOA then complained that their fence was higher than the maximum allowed height. You genuinely cannot win with some of these organizations. Rule number 28. A retiree in California was cited for the most absurd reason imaginable. He liked to sit on his front porch in the evenings and enjoy the sunset. That was it. That was his crime. A neighbor complained that his presence on the porch was intimidating and made them uncomfortable. The HOA sent him a letter suggesting he limit his porch sitting to avoid causing distress to neighbors. He was a 70-year-old man with a cup of tea, not a threatening presence. He continued sitting on his porch because it was his porch and he could do whatever he wanted on it. The neighbor continued complaining. The HOA continued sending letters. Nothing ever came of it because there was no actual rule against sitting on your own porch. But the harassment was exhausting. He started sitting on his back porch instead, not because the HOA demanded it, but because he was tired of the drama. The neighbor had successfully bullied an elderly man out of enjoying his own front yard. Rule number 29. We save the most absurd for last. A homeowner in Florida was cited for the shadow of his house. Yes, you read that correctly. His 2-story house cast a shadow that fell across part of his neighbor's lawn in the afternoon. The neighbor claimed the shadow was killing their grass and demanded something be done. The HOA actually entertained this complaint and sent the homeowner a letter asking him to address the issue. He asked how he was supposed to address the fact that his house blocked the sun. Was he supposed to move his entire house? Make it shorter? Install a sun in his backyard? The HOA had no answer. The complaint eventually went away because even they realized you can't fine someone for the laws of physics. But for a brief moment, this homeowner was under investigation for the crime of casting a shadow. And there you have it. 29 examples of HOAs at their absolute worst. 29 stories that prove the line between maintaining community standards and becoming petty dictators is thinner than the paper their violation notices are printed on. These organizations were supposed to protect property values, but somewhere along the way, they became more concerned with the color of your curtains, the size of your wreath, and the direction of your lawnmower stripes than with actual neighborhood well-being. If you've made it this far, congratulations. You've survived a journey through bureaucratic madness that would make Kafka proud. Now we want to hear from you. Have you ever received a ridiculous HOA complaint? Did your neighbor report you for something absolutely insane? Drop your stories in the comments below. We know there are thousands more tales of HOA absurdity out there, and your experience might be featured in a future video. If you enjoyed this collection of suburban nightmares, hit that like button and subscribe for more content that proves reality is often stranger than fiction. Until next time, may your lawns be green enough but not too green, and may your mailbox flag always be in the correct position.